Hello guys, welcome to Proxima What Ifs. So in this video, we will see, what if RIMURU Tempest was in Demon Slayer and fell in love with Nezuko? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. Stranger Beneath the Wisteria. The first demon didn't snarl. It whimpered. The Wisteria village smelled like soap and wet rope and rice steam. Nights here were usually thick with petals, lanterns bobbing. Tonight the blossoms stirred as if listening, and half-starved demons stumbled out of the tree line like sleepwalkers, heads tilted toward the sky. They pressed hands to their temples and tottered in the lanes, confused by a warmth that wasn't there. When the moon slid behind a cloud, the scent of burning flowers drifted down, a breath that wasn't wind. Tanjiro's eyes flicked, and he lifted the box more securely onto his back. "Nezuko, hold tight," he murmured, already moving. He was all quick apologies as he steered villagers into doorways and ducked under a laundry line. "Please, inside. Board the windows. Lanterns out. Sorry, excuse me." A demon with split lips and a cradle-strong grip stumbled like a drunk toward a crying child. Tanjiro's footwork turned on instinct. One step, twist, clean cut already swinging, and a wall of blue jelly hit the ground between the child and the demon as if an invisible paint bucket had upended itself in the lane. The jelly didn't splatter. It bulged, and held like a soap bubble caught mid-bounce, glimmering faintly with lantern light. The demon shoved. It wobbled back with a quiet, hollow thrum, as if someone had flicked a wineglass. "Okay, weird," a voice said cheerfully from somewhere inside the jelly. "That should have been a simple barrier. Why does this place feel like someone turned gravity sideways?" The jelly peeled itself into a man. He rose with his palms lifted and his hair slightly mussed, blue eyes warm in a face that read as oddly ageless. His clothes looked foreign and out of place in Taisho lanes. Clean, practical, not quite any uniform Tanjiro knew. He extended one hand toward the child and the other toward the demon, as if both were equally his to help. "Hi," he said to the child, who stared. "Pretend you didn't see me. There's a nice fox statue behind you, run to it." The child ran to the fox statue. The demon swayed, eyes dilated to the size of coins. It found the scent of the man's skin and leaned in, mindless. Hungry the way draft horses lean into harness. The man's smile thinned. "Right, don't make me feel bad about this." He flicked his fingers. Air thickened as if needed and set in place. The demon something that wasn't visible and sagged to its knees, held by a shape that looked like heat haze caught in a circle. It moaned. Its hands clawed weakly at its own chest, as if it was trying to pull something out. Seal. Caution. Ambient law density elevated. Magical expenditure produces world-line recoil. Recommend no reality edits. "I wasn't planning on rewriting anything," RIMURU replied, not out loud and not exactly in his head. But in the space his thoughts made when he wanted to laugh and didn't. Just putting training wheels on a mess. The air on his tongue had a taste, like citrus left in sun too long. Ciel's voice, crisp and intimate, slid between his thoughts. "Seal, breath pattern resonance detected. This world enforces combat tempo through practiced inhalation-exhalation cycles. Recommend synchronizing constructs to local cadence." "Copy," RIMURU thought. He glanced at Tanjiro. "You're sniffing me like I'm the stew." "I'm sorry." Tanjiro flushed. "You smell like someone who's going to help." "That's a new one," RIMURU said, and meant both the compliment and the world. The box on Tanjiro's back thumped twice. He set it down gently and slid the lid. Nezuko stepped with her bare feet whispering on the packed dirt. Her eyes, a quiet ember in the lantern dark, checked the lane and the rooftops and finally the child by the fox statue. She hummed once. Not a warning, more like approval. The demon clawed at the heat haze circle again and whimpered. Wisteria petals drifted and stuck to its hair like moths. "Why are they like that?" Tanjiro asked. "They're acting like it's almost morning." "It isn't." RIMURU's gaze tracked upward. The moon was a fingernail of quicksilver hooked in black. The air, though, had a faint brightness to it, as if the dark wasn't entirely honest. Something is tugging on the rules. And it's hungry. Seal. Estimate. Divine fragment. Thermal signature mirrors solar spectrum at attenuated amplitude. Divine fragment. RIMURU repeated. Because sometimes saying a thing out loud made people realize you weren't asking them to believe, only to keep breathing while the world made a new noise. Let's get people safe. Then we'll talk. He walked as he spoke. The heat haze circle floating amiably at his side with the demon trapped in it like a bug under a cup. Villagers peered through shutters. Someone hissed a prayer. Nezuko moved forward in a tight line with Tanjiro, her head tilting whenever the night breathed that false warmth again. She refused to let her hunger take even a nibble at the sound. RIMURU noticed her restrain. And filed it where he kept things that deserved respect. They reached the small shrine square, the wisteria elder trunk rising like a column of soft, pale thunder. The fox statue watched, impassive. RIMURU set the demon down with the gentleness of someone lowering a jar on a shelf. Now, he said to the demon, I'm going to ask you to pick left or right. The demon blinked, breath wheezing. It didn't answer. Left means you want me to put you outside the wisteria ring so the demon slayer core can handle you. Right means you want me to push you into the fox statue, which will kill you cleanly. You don't have to speak. RIMURU tapped 2 fingers, left then right, like a metronome. Just look. The demon's eyes twitched. They slid to the left. All right, RIMURU said softly. Thank you. Seal. Compassionate triage accepted. Local laws respond positively to non-coercive intent. Barrier stability improves by 3%. Good. RIMURU breathed with the world and lifted his hand. The heat haze cup tilted toward the village edge. The demon was still looking left when a gust of wind cut through the square and 2 figures landed on the shrine roof. One was a line drawn with water. Giyu Tomioka, silent and measuring. Water like even in stillness. The other was a storm in a hunter's skin. Tsunemi Shinazugawa, scars gleaming like honest handwriting, eyes already narrowed at the demon and at Nezuko as if the 2 words were the same. Tsunemi's blade left the sheath because his hands knew what to do even when his mind was still climbing to meet them. Step aside, he snapped. He saw Tanjiro, a demon girl with bamboo at her mouth. And a strange man who smelled like danger and mourning. You've had enough chances to choose wrong tonight. Tsunemi, Giyu said quietly. It didn't sound like a reprimand. Just a river going where it went. RIMURU put his palm out. He didn't move, which was the same as moving very carefully. If your sword kills indiscriminately, he said mildly, then you don't trust your own breathing. Tsunemi's smile was a scar. My breathing kills demons. That's trust. Not a demon, Tanjiro said, voice breaking and fierce all at once. My sister. I can smell the difference, Tsunemi snapped. So can I, Tanjiro said, and his fists trembled so hard he had to unclench them to keep his nails from biting skin. She smells like dandelion tea too long in the pot. Bitter, then sweet if you wait. Nezuko watched the men with her head tilted and her hand just above Tanjiro's sleeve, as if to say, don't hurt yourself to protect me, I'm right here. Giyu's eyes flicked to RIMURU. Who are you? Lost, RIMURU said. He let the honesty sit a second. But useful. Tsunemi stepped off the roof. His feet touched the shrine wall, then the ground. He didn't run. He simply was, and then he was there. A line and a decision, and his spear of a sword came for Nezuko's throat. RIMURU caught the blade without snapping it. It wasn't dramatic. It was simply a stop, the way a father touches a child's wrist just before the child knocks over a cup. Air became a sleeve, then a ring, then a soft pressure around steel. Time to the quiet and particular inhale Tsunemi was in the middle of taking. The sword hummed against nothing. Nezuko's hair lifted and settled again. Giyu gave a small sound, not surprise, more like a mental checkmark. Tsunemi's attention sharpened, which meant he got calmer. You can catch steel. Ever tried catching consequences? Every day, RIMURU said. He tapped the ring and let the sword go. You strike fast. Good for stopping things that don't think. Not as good for conversations. We don't talk with demons, Tsunemi said. I know a demon girl who makes a decent counter-argument just by standing where she stands, RIMURU said. He glanced down at the demon in the heat haze cup, who was whimpering at the wisteria scent. We don't need to make this more complicated. Let's put this one outside the ring and you do your job. Giyu nodded once. Agreed. Sanemi sheathed the blade with a sound that was somehow annoyed. You're lucky I'm outnumbered, he told Nezuko, but the words landed softer than they would have an hour ago. Nezuko dipped her head, not in submission but acknowledgement. They walked the demon to the village edge. Rimuru tipped the cup, and it rolled like a bead of water down a leaf and set the creature on the dirt outside the wisteria stakes. Somewhere in the trees, something watched the exchange with the unblinking curiosity of a hawk. By dawn the lanes were quiet, shocked clean. The villagers slept behind doors that smelled like fresh-cut pine. The wisteria hummed. Kagaya Ubuyashiki received them by afternoon. His estate felt like standing inside a kind voice. Paper doors breathed when the wind smiled. Children laughed 2 courtyards away. Which meant someone felt safe enough to laugh. Kagaya's skin was as delicate as rice paper over sunlight. He folded his hands with that miraculous patience that made people stop talking more than any shout could. Thank you for looking after my slayers, he said to Rimuru, as if thanking someone for bringing back borrowed books unwrinkled. You are far from home. True, Rimuru said. I can be useful while I'm here. You already are. Yorimitsu Hayakawa arrived like a crease in the room. He wore on Myoji blacks that didn't try to be pretty and carried his kitha. Way one carries a letter that must be delivered even if the messenger drowns. He bowed to Kagaya, then to no one else. The talismans at his belt whispered. Lord Ubuyashiki, he said, his voice a blade kept sharp with care. Permit me to speak plainly. You always do, Hayakawa, Kagaya said, amused. The Tsukikage Bureau observes an anomaly that matches divine pollution. Yorimitsu's eyes slid to Rimuru, then Nezuko, then back. He looked tired in a way that wasn't about sleep. We have a procedure for such intrusions. Binding, remote containment, eventual exile. It preserves human life. Remote containment failed, Giyu said. We saw your seal attempt on the temple north of Hida last winter. 12 dead operatives. 3 dead villagers. Yorimitsu inclined his head a fractional degree. Quote, we improve by writing the names of our failures, he said. And by not letting new ones write themselves. Tanjiro lifted his chin. Nezuko isn't a failure to be written. Yorimitsu met that bravery with the respect of a man who has buried too many brave children. Then let her prove it within conditions that keep other children alive. He faced Rimuru again. You are an edge where gods might hook their fingers. If you refuse binding, we will treat you as hostile. Rimuru's smile didn't go anywhere near his eyes. If I were hostile, you'd be discussing ashes. Kagaya's fingers tightened minutely. Hayakawa, he said, we do not threaten guests in my home. We set terms that keep a home standing, Yorimitsu replied. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The conditions are these. Why? Oh, you submit your core to a binding seal that prevents large-scale reality displacement. You limit your interference to non-divine means, and you make yourself available for evaluation at agreed intervals. Pass, Rimuru said. You would reject. I reject being turned into a tool you think you can point at your fears and put back on a shelf. Rimuru's tone stayed light. His eyes did not. But I will offer something better than obedience. Quote, Yorimitsu's mouth flattened. Better. Rimuru stood. He walked to the edge of the tatami where the courtyard began, put his palm up to the afternoon light, and breathed with the house. In, hold, out. He shaped air to the tempo of that breath, the way a potter shapes clay to the hum in her throat. Petals swirled and then, did not cross the threshold. The courtyard filled with a shimmer like heat. Then stilled. Nezuko, inside the room, took one step toward the new surface and put her hand out. Her fingers passed through. She smiled around the bamboo, surprised and almost shy, and pulled back. Wisteria Aegis, Rimuru said simply. A dome key to the bloom. Demons can walk out of it. They can't walk in. Humans can go either way, because that's how choice works. Yorimitsu walked to the edge and tested it with a talisman the way one might press the inside of a bruise to see how honest the pain is. The parchment hissed and then went quiet. He exhaled through his nose. Impressed despite himself. How many can you make? As many as you need, if you stop trying to put a collar on my soul, Rimuru said. And in exchange I accept a different kind of condition. Kagaya's eyes warmed. Name it. A covenant, Rimuru said. You don't ask me to change the rules that make your world yours. I don't break your laws because it's convenient. I help you protect people. And you help me keep a promise I made before I fell through a hole in the sky. Nezuko's gaze ticked to him as if pulled by a thread. Tanjiro watched her watching him and made a little sound that wasn't words at all. And the promise? Kagaya asked. To never decide for someone what they should be, Rimuru said. He looked at Nezuko when he said it. No matter how easy it would be. Yorimitsu's jaw worked. His eyes had the color of someone who had taken the easy way once and didn't forgive himself for how it tasted. He bowed, a reluctant, angled thing. Then we must test, he said. Not your strength, your restraint. Gyu's glance flicked toward the setting sun. This hour, dusk is when things pretend to be other things, Yorimitsu said. We'll set eyes on him when the shadows are honest. They chose the old training grounds. Wide-packed earth, dragonflies, the smell of sweat baked into the wooden posts. Slayers lined the perimeter, murmurs rippling like grass in wind. Tanjiro stood near the front, nervous energy in his hands. Nezuko stood beside him, bamboo steady between her teeth, the wisteria ribbon in her hair catching a little of the last light. Rimuru waited in the center, eyes on the sky while Seal did what Seal did. Seal, external actors approaching. Pattern matches Upper Moon 3, Akaza. Emotional state, anticipatory. He has detected your presence by anomaly in ambient martial field. I didn't send an invitation, Rimuru thought. You were an invitation, Seal replied, almost indulgent. The air changed the way it does right before someone throws a punch and pretends they won't. The ground flexed. A figure arrived in a blur and a thud, kicking up dust. He was bare-chested, tattoos like frost patterns, eyes alight with the joy of a fight he could respect. His gaze took in the assembly and dismissed it until it found the 2 points that mattered to him, the anomaly and the demon girl who refused to look at him like a meal. Akaza's smile was not cruel. It was hungry for meaning. There you are, he said to Rimuru, ignoring everyone else. You smell like the sun learning to throw a hook. Tsunemi's blade was half out before Gyu's hand closed on his wrist. Wait, Gyu said. Akaza tilted his head, gracious as a theater host apologizing for a late curtain. I'm busy. You're trespassing, Yorimitsu said. Akaza didn't look at him. I trespass where meaning is. You understand. He stepped forward and the slayers flinched without moving, the way reeds bow to a wave they've survived 1,000 times. Fight me, Rimuru sighed like am. And halfway through tying his sandals when someone asked him for directions. Okay, he said, but if you hit anyone else I stop being polite. Akaza laughed, delighted. Polite strength. That's new. They closed. There was no fanfare, only the clean click of 2 ideas meeting. Akaza's compass needle found a rhythm and sharpened it. He read intent in the angle of a shoulder, the tendons in a wrist. He drove his fist into the place a heart isn't, and Rimuru wasn't there, not because he moved faster but because he moved in the same tempo and chose a different beat. He set invisible posts in the air at inhalation points. Asked the world to hold them for a moment, and then let them go. Akaza's blows cracked those posts into glimmering shards of sound, laughing each time the world made a new noise. Earned power is the only kind. Akaza said between strikes, conversational like he was discussing tea. If you were born with it, break yourself to deserve it. I wasn't born anything, Rimuru said. Which was technically true and also fishing for the look on Akaza's face right after. He got it. Surprise. Then, appreciation. Oh, Akaza said, delighted. Then maybe you understand. Their exchange blew dust into rings. Every time Akaza pressed for Nezuko, just to see, Rimuru stepped into that line and pulled it crooked. It wasn't possessive. It was simple. You don't get to use her to test me. Akaza noticed. His grin dimmed. Strength that kneels, he murmured. Interesting. Tsunemi snarled. Stop flirting with the monster and hit him like you mean it. I'm trying, Akaza said, and did. His elbow came at Rimuru's temple. Rimuru put a square of air there and Akaza's elbow slid across it like a skate on ice. His other fist caught Rimuru's jaw and turned his head, and the slayers watching inhaled as one. Rimuru tasted blood and his smile was sudden and feral. "Thanks," he said. "It's been a while." Seal. Non-lethal damage at 12%. Regeneration throttled to local law parameters. Rico. MMEND restrained to preserve social trust. Working on it, Rimuru thought. He stepped, and Akaza met him, and for a time that had the shape of a long breath the world held two kinds of devotion. One that worshipped meaning through pain. One that served meaning through protection. A junior slayer stumbled in the periphery, tripped by shock wave. The boy's body started to fall into the space the next strike would occupy. Rimuru didn't think about it. He took the punch. Akaza's fist buried itself in Rimuru's side. Bone snapped with a sound like someone biting into a hard apple. Rimuru's body went light. He moved with it, turning so the blow slid him past the boy instead of through him. He planted, gasped, laughed once because the air hurt and that meant he was making good choices. The slayer scrambled back on hands and heels. Eyes wide, face still tribal with youth. Akaza had 100 openings. He didn't take any of them. He stepped back instead, confusion for the first time a flake on his tongue. "You had a better line," he said. "I had a better priority," Rimuru replied. His breath came steadier and then steadier still as Seal coaxed things back into place with minimalist grace. He rolled his shoulder, winced, and let Nezuko see him wince. She made a low sound, angry and soft, and took one step forward before Tanjiro's hand found her sleeve. She stayed. Akaza looked at Nezuko then, really looked, and saw that the hunger in her was a caged star she refused to feed. He shook his head like a man getting rain out of his hair. "Next time," he said, and it wasn't a dismissal so UCH is a promise to revisit a book one hasn't finished. When the sun is honest. He leapt, and the world folded, and he was gone into corridors that weren't there. The training grounds breathed out as one organism. Tsunemi sheathed his sword so hard the air clicked. Gyu's hand fell back to his side. Tanjiro pressed his palm to the ground and smiled as if the dirt had told him a joke only he could smell. Yorimitsu stood with his talisman still in his fingers, unreadable. Kagaya's voice arrived like rain. He had come without being noticed, borne across the estate with that quiet inevitability that made men bow without thinking. "You held," he said to Rimuru. "I didn't break anything that wasn't mine," Rimuru said, "Rai." He flexed his side and let Seal do a little more. "Seal, recommend medic. Al assistance from insect-aligned healer for human optics." "Shinobu," Rimuru thought. "Shinobu," Seal confirmed, with the vague sigh of someone who has decided to tolerate a friend's sarcasm. Shinobu Kocho appeared like a bell note. All polite edges and poison that smiled. "You make quite a first impression," she said, kneeling beside him without asking permission. Her hands were small and competent, and disrespectful of personal space in a way that would get people killed if she were not so very good at what she did. "Do you prefer bandages in blue to match your aesthetic?" "I prefer not getting stabbed," Rimuru said. "But fashion me however you like." She cleaned the blood at his lip with something that made his skin tingle pleasantly. "You bleed very tidily." "I try." Nezuko's shadow fell over them. She crouched, a little unsure in the space where tending and being tended to looked like the same pose. Her fingers hovered, then landed lightly on Rimuru's sleeve, as if checking weth. He was real enough to support the weight of a touch. He watched her eyes tracking every motion of Shinobu's hands, memorizing the ritual of care. He let his breathing slow to her tempo just because it made something inside him quiet. "Thank you," he said, and wasn't sure which of the three he meant most. Night came smiling and left grudgingly. In the deep hours, Rimuru and Tanjiro followed at SC. And in a memory to the wisteria elder's roots. The lanterns were out. The petals made their own light. The earth under the shrine felt feverish under the cool of a mountain night. Ciel's voice softened, Ed in the same way she does when there is a math problem she respects. Trace of combustion that is not combustion. The heat field is coded to dawn. Source. Bound fragment of a solar deity. Name likely. Kagutsuchi or related aspect. Bound. Rimuru whispered. Yes. This flora may be part of the cage. Tanjiro pressed his palm flat on the root and closed his eyes. He drew in a careful breath, one he'd practiced on cliff tops. It smells like a stove someone forgot to turn off, he said softly. But the pot is empty. Nezuko stood very still. Her gaze slid toward a place that wasn't the sky. The hair on Rimuru's arms prickled. For half a second he saw light behind the darkness, a thin gold filament. Nezuko's pupils narrowed. She hissed in the back of her throat like a cat seeing heat. Then she blinked, and the world was the world again. There, Tanjiro said. Yeah, Rimuru answered. They didn't touch anything else. Some locks or insults if you pick them with dirty hands. They sat instead, three quiet shapes under a tree that hummed, the fox statue listening like it wanted to understand and didn't, quite. Tanjiro talked about nothing, a crack in a roof tile, a knife nick on his thumb. The way Yorokodaki-san used to carry a basket like a memory on his back, until the talking made enough space for silence to feel safe. Nezuko leaned slowly until her shoulder found Rimuru's and stayed there. Seal. Elevated cardiac activity. Yours or mine? Rimuru thought. A pause that might have been humor. Yours. He didn't move. He let Tsunemi's scowl in his memory be a scowl. He let the village be sleeping and safe. He let himself be held up by a shoulder that weighed almost nothing. In the morning Yoromitsu returned alone, steps careful as if he was trying not to wake a sick child. He rooshed by the elder root and slid a small talisman into the soil with a surgeon's touch. It whispered and dimmed, marking the place without hurting it. He didn't notice Rimuru watching from the low wall until he had finished. Yoromitsu's eyes cut to him and did their measuring. You're making a map, Rimuru said. I'm making sure we don't forget where the floor is thin, Yoromitsu replied. Do you always look at the ground? Only when the sky wants to fall. Rimuru glanced at the wisteria and the pale slice of morning above it. We'll hold it up, he said simply. Yoromitsu's mouth twitched. Not a smile. A concession. Do not expect me to apologize for my caution, he said. Children die when I'm wrong. Same, Rimuru said, and the word had the weight of more years than anyone in this country could guess. You don't have to trust me. Just watch what I do. I am, Yoromitsu said. He touched the talisman as if it were a promise hard to keep. The Bureau will continue to observe. And this, he nodded slightly at the root, wakes more than it should, I will require your help. We will argue about terms later. Looking forward to it, Rimuru said dryly. Yoromitsu stood. He didn't bow. He didn't need to. He left like a man who would come back at the worst possible moment because that is when men like him are useful. That evening the estate hung lanterns shaped like wisteria clusters. And the children chased the moths, and the slayers ate until the rice tubs sighed empty. Rimuru fixed 3 Aegis domes over 3 entry paths, the shimmer barely visible unless you were looking for it. Kagaya thanked him and didn't give a speech about trust. He simply placed his hand on Nezuko's head the way fathers do when they bless and ask for nothing back. Later, when the lanterns were embers and the tatami smelled like sleep, Rimuru sat on the Angawa and watched the night lean against the garden. Nezuko padded over without noise. She pointed to the empty space beside him and raised her eyebrows in question. He nodded. She settled. Fireflies stitched patient threads between bamboo shadows. I won't fix you, he said softly. Even if I could, I'll help you be whatever you want. She turned the bamboo a fraction in her mouth, as if tasting the words. Then she bumped his shoulder with hers, a tiny nudge that meant, that's what I was going to tell you. He laughed, quiet, and his arm rested on the step behind them so that if she wanted to lean, she didn't have to reach. The wisteria bells sighed. Somewhere beyond the garden a talisman hummed to itself like a cricket. Far away, in corridors that were not quite corridors, a man with tattoos like frost stood under a ceiling that pretended to be a sky and grinned up at nothing. Next time, Akaza told the Dawn he couldn't feel yet. When you're honest. Closer. A bureau commander marked a map with 3 new blue pins and drew a ring around the words Blue Spider Lily. He didn't cross the ring out. He underlined it. Rimuru closed his eyes. For a moment, He was sitting beside a lake in another world, a goblin laughing, a storm of names he had chosen to protect tucked like birds under his ribs. When he opened them, the night here was the only night that mattered. He breathed in. He breathed out. He kept time with a world that had decided to give him a job. Tomorrow, he told the quiet and the girl who was teaching herself to speak around a hunger. We build a few more domes. And you show me how you count your breaths. Nezuko hummed assent, or thanks, or both. The petals listened. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Blue Lily Covenant. Morning learned to breathe before the sun showed its face. The cliff above the estate hung over mist like a ship's bow, and Tanjiro counted a slow 5 with his palm flat to the stone. In through your nose. Fill your back, Rimuru said, matching the rhythm instead of leading it. No need to make a sound like you're impressing a mountain. Mountains aren't easily impressed. Tanjiro laughed through his nose and let the breath pour out. Yorokodaki-san used to say that. Different words. Same face. I'm stealing the wisdom, Rimuru said. Not the wrinkles. Nezuko balanced on a rock with her toes curled. Sleeves rolled to her elbows, bamboo gently between her teeth. She watched Tanjiro's back expand and fall, then mirrored him with smaller movements. Her hunger pulsed like an old bruise under her skin. And she rode it instead of fighting it, like a girl letting the wave pass without drowning in its white teeth. Seal. Her heart rate settles on your count. Blood Demon A. RT signature fluctuates toward the soft end of thermal spectrum. Soft doesn't mean weak, Rimuru thought back. You've told me that often enough, Seal replied, almost wry. Nezuko glanced at Rimuru, as if she'd heard the flavor of his thoughts. Her eyes held longer than they had yesterday. She didn't try to speak. She simply blinked, then lifted her chin toward the trail, scenting the morning's mood. A figure climbed out of the trees with a map at his hip and a worry like a nail in his throat. Yoromitsu Hayakawa bowed to no one, not because he was rude but because he had built his spine into a post long ago and did not bend it except to carry bodies. He stopped when the cliff edge told him to stop and took in the scene. Boy, girl, anomaly. The Bureau's report this morning says the countryside is tilting, he said without greeting. Candles burned sideways in Kusatsu. 2 babies were born with fevers that only cooled at dawn. We are running out of time to pretend this is small. Then let's stop pretending, Rimuru replied. Tanjiro wiped his palms on his haori and faced Yoromitsu with the stubborn civility that made people twice his age feel ashamed of their own impatience. Good morning. Do you need water? No. Yoromitsu's eyes slid past him to Nezuko. I need choices that don't get my men killed. Same, Rimuru said, easy voice, hard eyes. The Bureau has a right, Yoromitsu said, and there it was. The hinge the morning would pivot on. Purification. We create a corridor of sutras, bind the anomaly, and let the divine contamination bleed into an earth vessel. It does not restore humanity. It does remove the spark that draws higher entities. If the demon survives, she survives empty of that light. If she doesn't, he didn't finish. He didn't need to. We will make the attempt if you submit your core to sealing. Otherwise the rite fails and everyone nearby dies screaming. Tanjiro rocked back like he'd been struck in the kindness. You want to, what would she be if you? Alive, Yoromitsu said. He did not step closer. He did not look away. Alive is worth more than pretty fictions about purity. Alive isn't the same as herself, Rimuru said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look at Yoromitsu. He looked at Nezuko. I won't trade her agency to make a graph look neat. Yoromitsu's jaw worked. A hinge grinding. Agency isn't a talisman that prevents funerals. Neither is fear. Rimuru stood, flexing the cliff damp out of his fingers. We'll save people today without your collar. Plan around that. Your plan, then, Yoromitsu said. Quickly. Rimuru tapped the side of his mouth. Thinking in a coil and speaking in a line. We lay 3 small domes, Wisteria Aegis, around the Zenryuji temple north of Hida. Reports say corridors have been misbehaving. That means a Biwa demon twisting space. We go in with a team that understands not to chase echoes. I'll prep single-use counters. Think of them as a borrowed breath, so a slayer without water or F. Lame at the right moment can still parry in that moment. And we keep Nezuko somewhere she can make the call to act or not act. You're counting on restraint within a maze-like killbox, Yoromitsu said. Your optimism offends me. Your pessimism is loud, Rimuru said without malice. It's useful until it kills the thing we're trying to save. Tanjiro's eyes were red at the corners. He swallowed, stepped to Nezuko's side, and took her hands in both of his. No one decides for you, he breathed. If at any point you want out, stomp my foot. Nezuko wrinkled her nose and stomped his foot immediately. He yelped, then laughed. Half a sob. Okay, he sniffed. Good. Noted. Nezuko looked at Rimuru and tried something. It pushed against her throat like a seed through stone. Duh. Her brow furrowed. Duh. NK. The K slid like a pebble finally giving way. Tanjiro's face did that breaking rictus a brother's face does when his sister says something she hasn't said in months. He brought his forehead down to hers and breathed. And the sound he didn't make would have shaken a house if it had been allowed out. Rimuru stood still to avoid tipping anything. His own chest felt too small. Seal, your heart rate. Yeah, he thought. Not embarrassed and not hiding. I know. They moved by noon, because panic is a kind of weather and you have to build while it's still only spitting. The temple sat on a knuckle of hill. Its paper doors yawning like a smile someone had forgotten to finish. Prayer plaques clinked softly in a wind that wasn't wind. The bell hung crooked. The Biwa demon had turned corridors into suggestions, the steps. When you looked at them too long, tried to persuade you to climb back down. Hashira and Slayers fanned into the trees like a practiced breath expanding a chest. Hinobu walked beside Rimuru with a small kit and a smaller smile. You left your blood very tidily on my cloth, she said conversationally. If you do it again, please alert me first so I can bring the good linen. I'm thinking of staining your teacups instead, Rimuru said. I'll charge you. You'll overcharge me, I can feel it. Obviously, Shinobu said, pleased to be understood. Giyu caught up without seeming to move at all. The roof line shifts when you blink, he said. Don't blink. That's cruel, Shinobu murmured. And unhelpful. Rimuru held out 3 small slivers that caught the light without sparkling. Counters, he said. They'll store 1 breath exactly the way you mean it. Not infinite, not new magic. Just, timing in your pocket. When you flick it, breathe with it. Don't argue about ethics with a coin. It already knows how you feel. Giyu took 1, weighed it like he weighed words. Thank you. Shinobu took hers between 2 fingers as if testing its allele for charm. If I die, I'm haunting you. If you die, Rimuru said, I'm terrible at my job. Tsunemi didn't take 1. He made a rude noise. Rimuru flicked a 4th sliver at him anyway. He caught it without looking. This bribe better be good. Tsunemi said. It won't work on you, Rimuru said. But you can give it to someone you'll deny caring about later. Tsunemi's scar showed a grin despite himself. Shut up. The first corridor split like a river around a rock and then forgot how to rejoin itself. Nakim's biwa thrummed under the floorboards, soft as a heartbeat heard through a wall. Tanjiro's nose wrinkled. It smells like the same incense 3 times, he said. The second one is upside down. Don't follow that one, Rimuru said. Nezuko paused at the threshold, eyes narrowed, skin prickling. Here the world tilted toward a fake dawn that had no sun to justify it. She slid her hand under Tanjiro's elbow and squeezed. He nodded, a little pale and very brave. They stepped in. Paper doors slap, ped softly against frames in patterns that felt meaningful and were not. Statues frowned with the careful disappointment of teachers who don't want to crush a child's hard work and must. Candles burned with their flames leaned, as if a secret wind was blowing at them from a wall. Yoromitsu's men moved like whispers, placing talismans that curled at the edges and stayed. The bureau knew how to walk on a floor it didn't trust. Seal, spatial function operator identified. Needle points at intersections. Recommendation. Tap into local rhythm. 3rd inhale, place a peg. Rimuru slid a breath into the corridor with the care of someone tucking a child into bed and set an invisible peg at the 3rd inhale. The floor firmed. A feral demon slunk out from behind a sliding door and hissed. Tanjiro stepped and cut. The demon's head bounced exactly once and rolled under an altar, leaving a smear that looked like a comma. The body smacked onto the paper mat and melted badly. That one smelled wrong, Tanjiro said, grimacing. Like old oil. That was never a person, Shinobu said, voice flat. That was a column holding up the illusion. Be careful, killing the decor can make the house mad. The house got mad. The biwa note bristled, and the corridor turned inside out. Nezuko yanked Tanjiro backward just before an archway folded on itself like a trap. Gyu's counter clicked once like a wind-up toy winding down, and his blade moved a hair sooner than his body would have allowed. The archway captured a ribbon of his haori and nothing more. Tsunemi whooped like a man at a good brawl. Now we're being honest, he said, teeth out. And cut a door that wasn't there for everyone else. Nezuko moved through space like a girl running a field she'd memorized in summer. She didn't chase the smell, she made the smell chase her. The false dawn tugged at her bones and she told it no. She set her palm down on a paper wall and felt heat traveling inside it like yeast in bread. Her purifying flame tried to answer and she told it to wait. Waiting hurt. They found a central hall by not following any map and by cheating with discipline. Prayer flags hung from beams that didn't agree with gravity, and the biwa demon sat in a shadow. Fingers barely brushing the strings. Nakim's face was as serene as a different woman's funeral. She looked at Rimuru the way musicians sometimes look at people who hum along, amused, not threatened. Akaza didn't announce himself because there was no point in announcing what already filled the room. He was simply suddenly there, the floor scuffing in delight under his feet. Had to see if the rumor was a lie, he said, head cocked, rings of light swinging in his irises. A sun that breathes, or a breath that wants to be a sun. Tsunemi swore and lunged. Gyu's hand caught him by the sleeve. Tsunemi shook it off like a dog shedding river water. Akaza didn't even look at him. He was already stepping into Rimuru's space, easing past politeness the way a fighter eases past his own fear. Let's find out, Akaza said. Nakim's fingers twitched. Doors opened. Slayers fell upward and sideways. A boy screamed as the floor ate his ankle with a mouth that wasn't there. Yorimitsu moved faster than his age promised. He slammed a seal on the floor and the mouth spit the ankle out with a noise like glass being kind to a knee. Two bureau operatives flung a woven cord in an arc aimed at no one and everyone. The cord settled around Rimuru's torso like a loose embrace that didn't wait for consent. The world tilted. Seal. Binding glyph signatures on cord. If you break it, world line recoil will. I know. Rimuru thought through his teeth. The cord tightened a notch, and his constructs shuddered like horses checked too hard. The peg he'd set in the hallway flickered and nearly fell out. The illusions pressed in. Akaza's smile sharpened. Oh, he crooned, delighted. Now we can see what you are when you can't cheat. I was hoping you'd be less charming the second time, Rimuru said dryly. He set his feet on a beat that made no sense and therefore made all the sense, buckled his knees a little to absorb the world's unkind angle, and met Akaza's wrist with his forearm at exactly the point where a breath becomes an exhale. They fought on the rhythm, failing to share it. Akaza took a strike on the chin and laughed. He took a heel to the sternum and looked pleasantly betrayed. He drove an elbow toward Rimuru's ear and that was when a slayer stumbled again at the edge of vision, knees going stupid on a floor that couldn't decide whether to be a floor. Rimuru's instincts said break the cord and fix the room. Seal whispered the math of catastrophe in his blood. Rimuru swore at himself and didn't break it. Instead he looked sideways. Tanjiro, already half-bent and braced by the memory of fire windows and father's dance, snapped toward the call. Rimuru tossed the last counter through the air at a lazy arc that would have been stupid in any other space. Here, the counter moved like a breath held and handed over, and Tanjiro snagged it without looking away from the buzzing shape of the room. On your mark, Rimuru said. Tanjiro nodded once. His lungs expanded. He beat once, twice, 3 times, and then something inside him lined up with something outside him and the counter clicked like a shutter opening. Hinokami Kagura flared without arrogance. He cut empty air with the stubborn grace of a boy reenacting a father's memory and the room remembered how to be a room where that motion could happen. The floor held. Nezuko's Purifier. Flame answered as if she had been waiting for someone else's heartbeat to give her permission. She blew a low stream at a moaning slayer whose shoulder dripped with a curse that looked like melted sunlight. The flame took it like a mother takes a fever from a child and moved it into herself. Her forearm blistered instantly, skin boiling, and she did not make a sound. Her eyes watered, not from pain but from the fact that a body does what it does when it burns. "Stop," Tanjiro gasped, half a plea, half a command. Nezuko shook her head once, sharp, and pushed the flame deeper into the curse like a hand into mud. The Slayer's skin went from the wrong kind of shiny to dull and then to normal. He jolted and blinked, breath stuttering. Nezuko reeled back. Rimuru had his hand out before he knew it. She took it and stayed upright with the pride of someone allowing help without losing face. Akaza, mid-combination, saw it. He didn't blink. He didn't take the opening on Rimuru's left. He stepped back instead, a breath length. Confusion fussing the corners of his mouth. "She fights the hunger for, what?" he asked, like a scientist peering into a petri dish and seeing love under glass. "Because she chose to," Rimuru said between their movements. "Choice is a word for people who've never had to break something to become anything," Akaza retorted. But his punch landed half an idea softer, and he despised himself for it. And he admired himself for noticing, and all of that lived in the flick of his eyes toward Nezuko again. Nakin's biwa twanged. The corridor alongside them rippled. Imitsu's men jerked the cord and the seal tightened around Rimuru's chest, trying to subtract him from the room the way one subtracts a word from a sentence and hopes the meaning stays. "Don't," Tanjiro shouted, voice cracking in a way that would have been funny if anyone had a spare hand to catch a laugh. "He's helping. We bind what wakes the sun," one of Yorimitsu's operatives said, cloth mask damp with exertion. Yorimitsu himself had hung back, placed talismans, orchestrated. Now he stepped in, and his hand pinched a seal between finger and thumb with the cool of a man setting a fuse he hates. For a beat, everything smelled like ink. He looked at Rimuru. "Prove me wrong," he said, and pushed. The cord bit. Rimuru's constructs went out like candles under a jar, and then he did something. That felt like walking into a room with his eyes closed. He trusted that the people around him could do the next part without him waving a god trick at the problem. "Gyu," he said. Gyu's response wasn't words. It was water. He flowed. Kisatsutai discipline pouring through sinew, and when a square of the ceiling peeled itself down to make a mouth around a screaming bureau man, Gyu stepped, drew, cut. Sheathed in one irritably precise blur, and the mouth was paper again. Shinobu danced. That was the only word. Her needle found the kinds of demons that weren't people and she lanced their GLU. EY knots with something that smelled like citrus and regret. "I'm busy," she told a paper dragon, and walked away while it wrote itself a more realistic head. Nezuko's flame broadened into petals around her burned arm. A flower trying to be disciplined. She moved toward a cluster of slayers who had been dusted by a hot ash that wasn't ash. The ash curled and subsided under her, leaving pink, umber. Ned's skin and a scatter of tears from men who didn't cry for themselves. Rimuru clenched his teeth as his side throbbed where Akaza had kissed a rib earlier. The seal burned his skin where it passed through skin and soul. "Seal, your choice is consistent with your promise. Good. Now breathe on the cord, not against it. Every seal asks its target to thrash. Don't perform for it." Rimuru breathed like a man folding laundry in a warm room. The cord loosened a hair, confused. Akaza slowed like a boxer who has stopped hearing the crowd. He looked at Rimuru, really looked, and found the absence of arrogance he'd expected to see and wanted to hate. He also found rage he couldn't read because it was not about dominance, it was about a promise to a girl with a burn on her arm. He grimaced as if he'd bitten something too sweet. "Enough for now," he said to no one and everyone, the fight sitting in his shoulders with nowhere useful to go. He blurred across a beam and put his fist into a talisman that Yorimitsu had placed. The seal exploded into clean smoke. "You will be stronger under a real sun." He glanced at Nezuko and, without meaning to, softened his jaw. "And you, stop proving me wrong." He vanished through a door that Nakame kindly opened for him with a plaintive note. The room let go of itself the way a body lets go when it realizes it is not dying. The counters clicked one by one, in Slayer's hands without having to be used. The flame in candles stood up straight as if relieved to be allowed to be flame. Yorimitsu's operatives slackened the cord, then tugged it off gently. Respectful the way you are with a weapon you've decided not to use. Rimuru stood with salt on his tongue and the shakiness that comes not from weakness but from having successfully refused to be something you could have been. The seal's pattern still tingled around his ribs. Yorimitsu approached. He stopped within arm's reach, the point at which a different kind of man would have swung. He bowed, not deep, but in a way that said, watch me do this even though I don't like it. You did not break the world to win, he said. Which is an uglier sentence when said out loud than it was in my head. I wanted to, Rimuru said. Because truth builds houses faster than politics. Thanks for not making me kill your men. My men made the choice, Yorimitsu said. I told them to make the wrong one. His mouth sighed. Lord Ubuyashiki will want to formalize something. Something is better than the nothing we had, Rimuru said. Nezuko's knees buckled because she had held too long. Tanjiro was there on instinct. And Rimuru was there on purpose, and between the two of them she did not fall. Her forearm looked like red glass. She blinked through wet and tried to smile around bamboo, an apology for scaring them both. Rimuru reached for a roll of bandage out of Shinobu's kit. Shinobu smacked his hand without heat and did it herself. If you're going to play healer, she said, you might as well do it with properly sterilized tools. Yes ma'am, Rimuru said. Nezuko watched the ritual with anxious attention, breath hitching each time Shinobu dabbed something that fizzed. She stopped. Tried again. Hurt. I know, Rimuru said. Careful to not promise anything about it stopping. I'm here. She tilted her head, searching his face. The bamboo clicked gently as she bit it. Not alone. He swallowed. The cord's ghostly burn tightening against his chest for no sensible reason at all, and nodded. Never. They walked out of the temple into light that pretended to be gentle and failed. Sky had a thin gold filament running through it if you knew how to squint. Villagers who had been sleeping in the forest under bureau watch stumbled back to their kitchens like people returning to their own names. The bell hung straight again. Yorimitsu left 2 men to take rubbings of the floor, the seals, the place the false dawn had pressed its stamp. The bureau was good at collecting the stories of disasters. They were not used to the story changing because someone said no at exactly the right time. By evening, Kagaya's audience room glowed warm as a throat lit by tea. He sat with that ease that made people confess to crimes they hadn't committed just to see if it would make him frown. Slayers lined the wall like a guard of honor that refused to call itself that. Kagaya's gaze lingered on Nezuko's wrapped arm. Will you let me thank you? He asked her. She eyed him, then nodded once. He bowed, not with his head but with his smile. Then I thank you for choosing pain that saved my people. Nezuko seemed to think about that sentence, turn it over, put it on a shelf. Yorimitsu stood opposite Rimuru as if flanking the idea they were about to write. He looked at Kagaya and then at the floor. Embarrassed to be the man with the paperwork. We need a covenant, he said. He glanced at Rimuru to see if there was going to be laughter. There was none. Rimuru folded his hands. No reality rewrites, he said, reciting the promises he'd made to himself out loud where they could be used to hold him. No breaching whatever locks your world put in on purpose unless the alternative is extinction. No turning demons into experiments or humans into shields. I'll protect. You'll monitor. We both keep Nezuko's agency at the center of our choices. Yorimitsu added without flourish, the Bureau will not bind you. If we believe the alternative is catastrophe, we petition Lord Ubuyashiki and we ask you first. You grant us one thing in return, a signal. If you intend to change a law, even a small one, let us be present to measure the recoil. Kagaya's smile widened a millimeter. I like it when men who dislike each other write faith together. I don't dislike him, Yorimitsu said, surprising himself a little. And then was annoyed to have been surprised. I dislike what he might call mercy. Mercy is an insult if misapplied, Shinobu said, cutting an apple with a needle like it was a knife. This one has good aim. Tsunemi snorted. This one had his rib broken and kept a straight back. I'll give him that. The rest is noise. Giyu nodded once. In Giyu, that was a speech. Kagaya set a brush in an inkstone and, with a few soft strokes, wrote the covenant's bones on paper with the grace of a man writing a poem for a daughter he had not yet met. He read it quietly, not maddeningly, tweaking a word so it meant exactly what it already meant. Then he set the brush aside. Nezuko reached out with her bandaged hand. Kagaya placed the paper where she could see. She stared at the characters, considering. Then she set her fingertip on the corner and tugged once, a child's proof that a thing was attached to the world. Yes, she said, not more than a breath. It landed like a seal regardless. They ate late. Rice hot and sticky, pickles that tasted like discipline, miso rising to the nose like a blanket being aired. Relief made everyone louder, and then quieter, and then a little giddy. A bureau operative laughed too sharply at a joke and then apologized to his soup. Shinobu's apprentices argued over who had to clean the poison vials. Tanjiro fell asleep sitting up and Snow read once so violently he woke himself and apologized to the tatami. Rimuru slipped out to the Ingawa with a bowl he didn't end up eating. Nezuko joined him without being asked, as if they had agreed. Neither of them had been speaking that this was their spot. Cicadas sang like wires humming. Wisteria leaves clicked together like a secret handshake practiced by trees. He took the bandage end and rewrapped the last inch. Careful as if dressing silk. You don't have to be brave when no one is watching, he said. Nezuko made a face that meant, thanks, but your advice is late. Right, he said, lifting his hands. I'll file a complaint with management. She bumped his shoulder with hers lightly, the joke acknowledged. Then, after a beat, very quietly, AF, raid. For you, he said. And for me, which is unusual. I'm used to being the problem, not the person who has to keep his promises small. He stared at his hands. I haven't been small in a long time. Nezuko thought, tilting her head. And then to his startled delight she reached up, put her palm flat over his sternum where the seal had burned, and tapped twice. Big, she said, finding the word easily. She tapped again, softer. Careful. He exhaled like someone stepping off a ferry onto a dock that moved but didn't throw him. Careful, Big. I can try that. She grinned, bamboo shifting. It was the grin of a girl who had discovered that her teeth could meet joy. Not just meat. The knight leaned close as if to hear gossip. Out past the gardens, wisteria vines tugged toward the east like they'd caught a scent. The blue spid. Lily thing hummed under the hills with the stubbornness of a god too proud to appear when called and too hungry to sleep through its own name. Yorimitsu stood alone in a corridor and marked a map, hands steady, eyes not steady. Akaza found a quiet rooftop and stared at the horizon, jaw tight, trying to decide if being wrong could feel like being alive. Nakame tuned her strings, the room growing and shrinking with the minute adjustments. A musician getting ready to play for a king and a son at the same time. Rimuru and Nezuko sat in the doorframe between light and out. The covenant sheet dry. Ed on Kagaya's desk like a pond settling after stones. Somewhere, very far, a rift in the air wobbled like a question. We'll get the babies their dons back, Rimuru said eventually, apropos of nothing and everything. Nezuko nodded once and leaned her head into the notch of his shoulder as if her skull had found its home in a word she hadn't known she was missing. Tomorrow, she said. He smiled, without showing his teeth to the night. Tomorrow. The wisteria bells sighed. The house exhaled. The paper door slid whisper soft on its groove and stopped, exactly at the place a careful big man had decided it should stop. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. Dawn against the Sun Eater. Infinity Castle tilted at an angle no carpenter would admit to. The corridors stretched toward a horizon that wasn't there, stairs ran up and then sideways. And lanterns burned with flames that leaned like grass before a wind. Nakim's biwa plucked a steady pattern that wasn't steady. The note rose, wavered, and settled a fraction sharp. As if the castle were trying to tune itself to a sun no one could see. Muzan Kibutsuji stood at the center of that false morning like a man wearing a crown that bit into bone. ABL. At Corona hung behind his head, shadows arranged into light. The air around him had a smell Rimuru could taste at the back of his tongue, metal warmed on a stove and a sweetness like fruit left on the sill too long. When Muzan smiled it was with the ease of someone who had never met a piece of himself he didn't expect to keep. "Your face is new," Muzan said mildly, as if greeting a neighbor over a fence. His eyes flicked over Rimuru, past Giyu, past the slayers clustered in the coils of the castle, and found Nezuko only long enough to record the color of her ribbon. The corona thickened, pulsing once. "Your scent is older than you pretend." Akaza didn't wait for introductions. He stepped into the light that wasn't light, put his fist into a wall that wasn't a wall, and tore a fresh hole in the room. "If you want to be the sun," he told Muzan, "come stand in the place where it can hit you." Muzan's attention sharpened like a knife turning toward a new piece of fruit. "Kill him," he said to no one in particular. And the castle obliged, flinging spikes of architecture into Akaza's path like claws sprouting from paper. Giyu moved with the mechanics of patience. He cut where the spikes agreed to be cut. Rimuru breathed into the corridor's heartbeat and set pegs at intervals so that when the floor forgot itself, there were still places the slayers could step that would hold. The pegs hummed, tuned to Hinokami's cadence and water's quiet. Muzan's corona flickered, the shadow light rippling as if it had met a stone in a stream. Seal, fragment signature fully merged with host. The ember is using Muzan's metabolism to counterfeit day. Constraint, predation of the core will import unstable divinity into your system. Probability of world line fracture, unacceptable. I'm not swallowing a god, Rimuru thought. Dry as a man refusing a second cup of tea. We stick to heat. We leave essence alone. Correct. You will need an anchor. Nezuko, he said aloud, not as an order, not as a plea. As if saying her name could confirm a plan that would only work if she wanted it. Her eyes lifted to his across the impossible room. The bandage on her forearm, clean this morning, already H. Add a faint brown halo where burned skin had wept. She didn't look at Muzan. She looked at the place the false sun rubbed against the world and made it squeak. She nodded once. Kagaya's voice, frail and undefeated, slipped from a nearby corridor like incense. The core had arrived in pieces, the castle ferrying them in like fish caught in a clever net. Kagaya's children led squads with eyes too old. Hashira lined the edges of reality. Yorimitsu stood with sutras fanned in one hand, his mouth a hard line, his other hand shaking once and then not again. Hold the field, Kagaya said softly, NT. He whirled seemed to make a little space to listen. Do not permit lies to become roads. Keep faith with breath. At the city's edge, where people woke to a sunset at dawn and couldn't make their hands ache. Old spoons, wisteria aegis domes flared up like soap bubbles in sunlight. Rimuru had thrown them last night while Nezuko napped and Tanjiro drooled on his own sleeve, and now they shone faintly as demo. NS skittered and hissed at the impossible morning. Tsunemi stalked between domes like a man walking his own heartbeat. He flipped the counter coin Rimuru had bribed him with, caught it, and shoved it into the hand of a trembling junior slayer without breaking stride. Use it when you forget yourself, he said. Not before. Why yes, Shinazugawa-san. Don't, san, me, Tsunemi snapped, then, after 2 steps, muttered, good lad. To the wind, unwilling to be overheard being kind. Inside the castle, Nakims thrummed and walls rewrote their intentions. Yorimitsu's talismans kissed the sliding doors and the paper hissed. Root chamber, he said, voice a knife kept dull on purpose. We cut the bindings and make the seal hungry for dirt instead of sky. Tanjiro's hand found Nezuko's, fingers warm and calloused. If you want to stop, he said, the knife of decision clean in his voice, you stop. Nezuko squeezed and let go, because there are moments when letting go is a kind of promise too. They moved. The castle shifted to put them somewhere else. Shinobu smiled politely at a dragon mural until it became a mural again. Giyu tilted the floor a degree with one quiet strike, and the SP. Iral of hallway unspooled like a spool used correctly for the first time. Muzan let Rimuru come to him because it amused him to be a destination. You brought a trick, he said, eyes loving the corona as a man loves his own reflection. It will not save her. It isn't for saving, Rimuru answered. He hated the way Muzan said her like a thing. He kept that hatred tight and useful. It's for choosing. Akaza laughed loud and unpretty. You talk like a monk, he told Rimuru, sliding into range with the body hum of a man in his best suit. Show me a sermon that bleeds. He rushed. Rimuru met him, clapped a palm to his wrist, and rolled him, not to throw but to place. Akaza snorted and accepted the gift, driving a heel into a glossy pillar till it shattered. Light that was shadow sprinkled out like dark hail. Earned power, Akaza said, a mantra. Or nothing. Muzan stepped down from his false dais. The floor welcomed his bare feet like a loyal dog. He flowed with a speed that had nothing to do with kindness and everything to do with appetite. The corona flared and the air got a degree hotter, a degree more convincing. Somewhere below the castle, babies wailed and mothers said the old names of gods with their hands shaking because the names didn't seem to stick. Seal. Root chamber fluctuating. Second team at threshold. Go. Rimuru told the castle with his jaw, and it didn't listen. He chose the next best thing. Akaza, he called. Break me that window. Akaza glanced at him, counted on fingers only he could see, and then smashed a seam in the air with a fist that didn't stow. P being beautiful just because it loved to break. The seam tore. Light leaked through it like blood under a door. Gyu, Rimuru said. Gyu moved, not waiting to be thanked, haunting the edge of the tear like water learns a riverbed. And slipped through. Don't die, Akaza told him, without looking, as if muttering to a stubborn rival across a training yard. You don't, either, Gyu said, and was gone. Muzan's smile rippled. Borrowing. I never liked beggars. What do you call your relationship with the sun? Rimuru asked, equally polite. Muzan's eyes didn't narrow. He wasn't the kind of man who let words draw lines on his face, but the corona shivered. I call it correction. The first punch wasn't a punch. It was a piece of space deciding to be where Rimuru's throat was. He set a peg, the throat moved a hair. The fist missed and didn't miss, grazing him with heat that charred the air. The second strike was old-fashioned, a hand with fingers, a wrist, a forearm, a shoulder. Muzan had never needed a style because no one had required him to get better. Rimuru denied him the dignity of easy victory. He caught a forearm with a construct timed to the castle's breath and let the shock run through him into the floor. The floor, having been told how to be a floor, held. The corona peeled off a sheet of darkness and threw it like a discus. Rimuru ducked and it shaved hair from his temp. With the intimacy of a barber who hates you. Akaza slammed in behind Muzan. He didn't pretend he was altruistic. He just liked the part of himself that is a blade, and Muzan was a whetstone no man could ignore. He hit Muzan's spine. Muzan didn't have a spine where a polite person would keep one. The hit sank, wrong soft, and the corona chuckled. Stop trying to be interesting, Akaza snarled, Nd put his knee where a person is always a person, under the ribs. Muzan turned and his hand was a spear. It punched a hole through the air where Akaza's face had been. Akaza let it take a lock of hair and laughed, a little mad. You can't even bruise right, he told Muzan, disgusted. The castle shuddered. Down below, the root chamber was smaller than rumor. Blue spider lily vines ran through the floor like veins grown up from the earth's hand. The air hummed with prayer that had been happening for centuries, quiet, boring, undefeated. Yorimitsu's sutras trembled against the walls, trying not to. Remember the last time their cousins had burned. Tanjiro bowed his head to the flowers not because he was pious but because manners anchor a boy in a world that sometimes forgets to be a world. Nezuko stood beside him with her hands open and her mouth bare for once. The bamboo lay across Shinobu's lap like a temporary truce. Which first? Shinobu asked briskly, because someone had to cut the ribbon and she was good with delicate weddings. Yorimitsu hesitated. He wasn't a man who hesitated, not where people could see. He looked at Nezuko and forced the question to be small enough to ask. Will you do it? He said, each syllable a stepping stone across water. Nezuko didn't look at him. She looked at Tanjiro, and at the floor, and at the way her bandage had a brown halo because her body tried to leak away its pain in the night and failed. She breathed, once. Yes. Shinobu offered the bamboo back. Nezuko shook her head and pushed it away. Later, she said, clear and small. Yorimitsu nodded once, not trusting his voice. He placed 3 sutras at the triangle points of the chamber. On the third breath, he said, if you feel a pull, stop. If you feel nothing, stop. If the world tries to become a mouth, I will do something stupid. Please forgive me. Tanjiro huffed a laugh, for luck. We will, he said. They breathed. The sutras hummed. On the third, Nezuko stepped into the circle and lifted her burned arm. The purifying flame came like a shy animal called gently but firmly from under a porch. It curled out, petals of heat finding the bindings that smelled like ink and sun and old skin. The chamber boomed cobweb soft as the first knot loosened. The air felt lighter and then heavier and then a shade less dishonest. Shinobu pressed a cloth to Nezuko's forearm and didn't tell her to stop. Tanjiro counted for both of them and for himself and for Yorimitsu, who needed someone else to prove numbers still worked. The second knot undid itself faster. The third fought lick. A man ashamed of losing in front of his children. Nezuko's flame pushed until it nearly went white. She bit the inside of her cheek and the taste of blood gave her the shape of the word she needed. Now. They cut. The castle collapsed up there and settled down here. The false dawn flickered. Muzen's corona sputtered like a lantern catching its own wick on fire. In the city, sunlight spears, thin rods of angry morning, stabbed at wisteria aegis domes and slid off as if insulted. Tsunemi squinted, laughed without joy, and cut 3 in an arc so clean that a junior slayer gasped as if someone had snapped a chalk line in heaven. Hold your breath like it's the only coin you'll ever have, Tsunemi barked, and for a while, for a moment worth a life, the line held. In the castle again, Muzen looked down for the first time. He had never liked to look down, the habit made him itch. He did it now because the floor didn't listen as well as he had anticipated. Nakame, he said softly, and she play. Add the note that meant I am here and the note that meant I am not enough, layered together like polite paper. Rimuru stepped into Muzen's reach because sometimes the correct direction is toward a thing you hate. The corona flared. Heat washed over him and tried to give his skin lessons it didn't want. He put his hand into it and remembered a kitchen in another world and Chloe laughing with a spoon between her teeth. He let the memory be his peg and the heat became only heat again. Give her to me, Muzen said. His voice made the castle blush. It wasn't made for this room or this day. I will cure her. I will burn the weakness out and leave the part of her you love. Akaza made a sound like a man biting down on a laugh that would kill him if he let it loose. He's bargaining, he told Rimuru, fascinated and disgusted. He's never had to. He's bad at it. Rimuru met Muzen's eye and let every single person he had failed stand behind his gaze. Not to weaponize them, to remember the cost of shortcuts. I don't love her because she needs fixing, he said. I love her because she doesn't need to be anyone's project to deserve the sun. Love is a trick the weak call a plan, Muzen said, dismissive. Funny, Rimuru said, and smiled without showing teeth. That's what fear says when it borrows your mouth. Muzen stopped smiling. The corona's edge sharpened to a saw. He swung it like a farmer cutting sugarcane. Rimuru ducked. Akaza took the brunt willingly, laughing as it burned the scar across his chest into new, ugly truth. Again, he said, delighted to be alive. Seal, anchor is ready. Root chamber bindings severed. The ember will seek the next place it recognizes, the sky. Solution now or never. Nezuko, Rimuru said, not a command. A question. She answered by moving. Nakame, to her credit and possible regret, opened a door. Nezuko stepped through with Shinobu at her shoulder and Tanjiro half a step behind, breath controlled to the point of fainting. Yorimitsu brought the last sutra like a man offering a bride price he wished were larger. The castle reeled, trying to make stairs into walls and floors into Tuesdays. Nezuko ignored it the way ships ignore the ocean, with respect and stubbornness. Tanjiro caught her eye and shook his head once. Please, he whispered, begging without shame. Please don't. She reached up and cupped his face with her unburned hand and smiled the small, ferocious smile of girls who never had any business surviving and do anyway. I choose she said, and the grammar didn't matter and never would. She turned, and walked toward the false sun. Akaza stepped across Muzin's guard with the insolent ease of a man cutting in at a dance and slammed both hands into the corona, forcing it outward, away. You wanted a real Don, he grunted to Rimuru. Make one. Rimuru didn't thank him. There would be time to hate and love him later. He stepped in behind Nezuko and spoke to the castle and the room and the god fragment and his own worst habit of fixing everything like it was a broken stool. Only heat, he breathed. Only heat. Seal. Limiter engaged. Predator aperture set to energy state intake only. Prepare for feedback. Hold me together, he thought. I always do, Seal said, and for once it sounded like tenderness, which he would probably mock her for later and never mean. Nezuko stood under the false dawn and lifted her arms. The purifying flame rose. It wasn't the hungry bloom from the temple, it was small and entirely itself, a flower kindled at the center of her chest where human sits with demon and calls a truce. It spread up her neck in thin, disciplined lines. Her skin went glassy. She gritted her teeth and did not apologize for the pain. Now, Rimuru said, and opened his hand. The heat came like a tide out of place and he took it. Only the heat, only the energy, leaving the pattern that called itself God to find another anchor. It looked for his throat. It looked for his eyes. It tried to crawl into his marrow and be clever. Seal shut doors with a snap and a smug little flourish that would make him laugh later when he had the air. Muzin howled, not from pain, from humiliation. The corona stuttered. The false dawn flinched as if a cloud had crossed a sun that wasn't there. Nezuko's flame steadied and then shuddered and then steadied again. Tanjiro put his shoulder under nothing at all and pushed as if that would help. Yorimitsu laid the sutra on the floor with both palms and whispered a name he hadn't said since he was a child, and someone started keeping track of the names of the dead. Akaza screamed cheerful obscenities and smashed Muzin's face against a pillar until the pillar arched its back like a cat and broke. Gyu returned through a scene with water clinging to his sleeves, eyes cold, hair out of place. He took one look and moved to where the mistake would be made if no one filled it. Now, Kagaya said, as if calling a cadence for prayer. The core moved. Breath synced. Hinokami stepped into water, which stepped into others, which stepped into love and hatred and fury and salvation until the whole room felt like a lung exhaling after being held too long. Tsunemi, miles away, felt the click in his bones and cut two spears at once, laughing. A boy under an Aegis dome flicked his coin, breathed on the beat, and parried a strike he would have worn in the face an hour ago. Rimuru's hand shook. Heat swelled, and he drank it like a river made of mouths. Seal counted, and he kept count with her, because numbers are a kind of faith too. Nezuko's flame licked the corona's edge. Muzin swung. Akaza broke the swing. Gyu pinned the line. Shinobu, who had no business in a room like this in a world like this, stabbed a new thing that tried to be born where Nezuko's flame made space. And it died with a sound like paper catching and then going out. Muzin's body failed him in the most insulting way possible. It remembered how to be human. For a blink, he was only a man with a terrible temper trapped in the morning like anyone else. The corona faltered, a halo behind a head that didn't want one. Tanjiro saw in the space of that blink how a human's face looks when you give it back and then take it away. He hated that he saw it. He swung anyway. The castle spoke once in a voice that was Nakim's and not, some wordless apology, some delicate pride at having lasted this long, and the floor took weight one last time like a great bow unstrung. Muzin's crown broke. Not cleanly, not nobly. It fell like glass dragged off a nail and shattered without grace. Rimuru closed his hand. He had to, or the heat would climb up his arm and write its name on his ribs. He swallowed the last of it. Nezuko's flame, suddenly without a quarrel, sank back into her skin and went out, leaving tiny flowers of scar on her throat that would fade and then not, depending on whose eyes looked. She dropped. Tanjiro caught. Rimuru caught both. Muzin's body tore itself into clever pieces and ran for the corners of the room. The core was ready. Breath met flesh. Nichiren found its work. Somewhere far under their feet, a blue spider lily root drank and didn't tell anyone about it. Silence rang. It rang for a long time. Akazu leaned his forehead against a pillar and laughed once, hoarse. He didn't sound happy. He didn't sound broken. He sounded like someone who had been something for too long and was suddenly allowed to remember being a man. Don't follow me, he told no one in particular, and Nakame, bless her misplaced loyalties, opened him an exit that led somewhere with night air and rooftops that didn't move. Gyu wiped his blade and sheathed it with the quick, irritated flick of a man who would rather not make a ceremony out of a day that had already insisted on too many. Shinobu sat down where she stood and pressed fingers to her temples, then leaned without asking and stole Rimuru's shoulder to use as a pillow for 30 counted breaths. You are very inconvenient, she told him, eyes closed. I hear that a lot, he said, soft with relief, shaking a little now that he had permission. Yorimitsu stood and stared at his own hands as if counting fingers to make sure the number hadn't changed. Then he turned and bowed to Nezuko. Not to Kagaya, not to Rimuru, not to the paper that would become a report, but to the girl with the bandaged arm. Thank you for not letting my fear make you small, he said. Each word paid for. Nezuko, pale and panting, blinked at him and searched for the right answer and found the smallest, truest one. Okay, she said, and smiled around the ridiculousness of a world where enemies tell the truth. Rimuru let the castle go quiet in his ears. He listened for the ember's name and heard it muttering under the earth, annoyed, bound Aga. Into dirt and root and the patience of things that grow slower than hate. He reached without reaching, laid an invisible hand over the place it would wriggle, and promised to watch. The world, feeling seen, settled. By the time night finally remembered itself, the Corps had carried their wounded home. The city's kitchens smoked with real breakfasts for the first time in days. Tsunemi scolded 3 terrified boys for crying and then made sure no one saw him handing them sweet buns in the dark. Nakame vanished into rooms that were never really there, her biwa tired, precise metronome that would not play for kings for a while. Kagaya wrote a letter to no one and tucked it under a flower vase. It said nothing interesting. It said thank you in a line that a daughter would be able to read one day when names were only names again and not lists. The covenant became policy without anyone shouting. Yorimitsu sent a runner to the bureau with a paper that said, in the dense, humorless script of men who have forgotten how to write poems, we do not bind anomalies without consent. We do not perform purifications that erase choice. We monitor. We ask first. We apologize in person. Apologize. His lieutenant whispered, scandalized. In person, Yorimitsu repeated wearily, as if the second part were the part that mattered. Bring your shoes. We will walk. On the Ingawa, under wisteria that didn't lean toward the east anymore as if it expected someone to call its name at the wrong hour. Rimuru sat with his back against a pillar. He had a bandage around his hand because Shinobu had demanded the theater and he found he didn't mind giving it to her. Nezuko sat beside him in a borrowed haori, hair a little wild, mouth bare, the bamboo in her lap like a past test. Tanjiro hovered with anxious competence of a brother who knows how to make tea and how to massacre a demon and is terrified of doing the first thing wrong. He set 3 cups down and retreated with a bow that tried to be normal. Thank you, Nezuko said. Clear. She held the warm cup the way tired people hold warmth, as proof. 4. Not deciding. Rimuru looked at her and let himself be as honest as he wanted to be without making a beautiful mess of it. I was afraid, he said. Of you getting hurt. Of me reaching for the easy thing because I could. Of how much simpler it is to be a hammer. He blew on his tea. Seal kept the doors shut. Seal, I also prevented your irresponsible impulse to adopt the son. Don't ruin my moment, he thought, a laugh in his head. We're being brave. Noted. Nezuko dipped her head, amused at a conversation she couldn't hear and somehow understood. She placed her hand, very gently, over Rimuru's bandage. He looked down. Her palm was small, scarred from the day's work. Steady. Stay, she asked, and the word didn't beg. It invited. It made space. He glanced past her through the garden to where the night lived like a cat on the far wall. Somewhere in a different sky, a hole might be wobbling, asking if he wanted to fall back through. Somewhere in a different house, People he loved were doing the boring business of being alive without him, and the thought was a comfort, not a knife. "I'll stay," he said. "While the roots settle, while the bureau learns to knock, while the core remembers how to get bored." He bit his lower lip, suddenly a touch shy for the first time in years. "While you decide how you like your mornings." She smiled, slow. "With you." He swallowed, because some joys are heavy. "Deal." Akaza balanced on a rooftop just far enough away to pretend he wasn't watching. He scratched the new burn across his chest and scowled at the horizon. Earn it, he told himself, and wasn't sure whether he meant the next fight or the next way of being a person. He leapt into the honest night. Not running, exactly, just continuing. Yorimitsu came down the path with dust on his boots and a face like a man who has found a way to be tired without becoming cruel. He stopped at the gate and did something that felt like a trick even to him. He left his talismans there, unneeded, like a pair of sandals you remove at a threshold where you are finally welcome. Kagaya walked the garden with his hands in his sleeves and breathed. When he paused, it wasn't because the disease in his bones complained, it was because the wind said something kind and he wanted to hear it twice. Rimuru finished his tea. Nezuko leaned into his shoulder like a punctuation mark at the end of a long sentence. Gentle, decisive, making the clause mean what it should. Cicadas shed the dark together with a noise that had the decency to be ordinary. The covenant on Kagaya's desk didn't glow. Paper doesn't glow. It just sits, and gets read, and gathers fingerprints and the occasional tea stain. And outlasts men with loud ideas. Tomorrow, Rimuru said, because promises feel more real when you put them in a word that wakes you up early. We check the roots. We fix the dome by the northeast wall. We teach Tsunemi how to glare less. Nezuko lifted her head. No, he laughed. You're right. That last one is impossible. She nodded, satisfied. After a while she reached up her bandaged hand and hooked a finger into the fabric at his shoulder and tugged, asking without asking. He shifted, and she tucked herself under his arm in a way that felt like an old habit they hadn't had time to learn and had somehow always known. The wisteria bells sighed. The night refused to become morning. And in the soil under a certain quiet temple, a sealed ember sulked and waited foe. A century the way stubborn things do when reminded that time is not their only enemy. Rimuru held the girl he had not fixed and the world he had not rewritten and let the relief be its own kind of fire. He breathed in. He breathed out. Somewhere, Seal counted with him, not because he needed the help, but because it is nice, sometimes, to be accompanied. Careful Big, Nezuko murmured, almost asleep. Careful Big, he agreed, smiling into her hair. Always. The petals listened. Chapter 3 End.